Hi, my name is Carol Shaw, and thanks for tuning in for another of my really fun conversations with my quilt friends all over this industry. I have the honor and pleasure of interviewing Sherri Lynn Wood, who is an author and an award-winning artist and quilt maker. She's also a fabulous teacher. Sherri Lynn has been improvising quilts as her creative life practice for over 30 years, and she's been facilitating the liberating process of improv through patchwork with makers worldwide. So we're really excited to have her here today. Sherri's best-selling publication is the Improv Handbook for Modern Quilters, a guide to creating, quilting, and living courageously, which she published in 2015. In her book, Sherri Lynn provides scores or frameworks for flexible patterns and creative exploration, along with really practical instruction in stitching techniques and color theory. Sherri was the keynote speaker at QuiltCon in 2019 and is the recipient of numerous grants and fellowships, including the Joan Mitchell Grant for Painters and Sculptors and 2 MacDowell Fellowships. So welcome, Sherri Lynn, and thanks so much for being with me today.
Thank you, Carol. I'm so honored to be here and excited to be here
Sherri
with
Lynn and
you.
I could probably talk for the next 6 hours, but we promise not to do that because our brains just go all over the place because we love our field, our creative practice, and we love the people who come to our workshops and hang out with us as well. So let's jump in. And my first question is the one I'm sure you get. So how did you decide to start making quilts, and why did you choose quilting as your creative medium?
Well, I will just have to say, I was sewing forever since I was 12, and my grandmother got me excited about sewing because she used to make draperies. She didn't live near me, but she would send me pattern, like remnants and things from her. So, but I made clothes, and you know, it skipped a generation. My mom didn't sew at all. She didn't sew clothes. She didn't sew quilts. Um, so I got into sewing, but it wasn't until my mid-20s when I started making quilts. And I started with, I had been exposed to it when I was a kid, but I hadn't ever really tried to make my own quilt until I was like in my mid-20s. And I started with a simple rail fence was my first quilt. And I just did fixed pattern quilting, meaning that, you know, I followed a pattern that I found that I liked, used rulers and cut with a ruler. And I just was very fortunate. I lived in Chapel Hill, North Carolina at the time. And just the timing, like within a year after I started making a quilt or two, I hadn't been making that much. I saw the exhibition Who'd Have Thought It, and that was an exhibition of African American quilt makers in the collection of Eli Leon, and I think the most well-known right now is Rosie Lee Tompkins.
Mm-hmm.
So I just went to that exhibit. It was at the Acklam Museum of Art, so it had traveled all over the country, and it was at the Acklam Museum of Art, and I went to it, and I was just completely blown away. It was just like nothing I had ever seen or imagined ever before. And I was so moved. There was this jazz musician, a vocalist, Nina Freelon, who is from the Durham area, that was singing like the jazz music.
Wow.
And I just walked in and saw these amazing quilts. And I mean, I got shivers. I just felt like, I felt called.
Yeah.
I felt like this is what I want to do.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yep.
I was making quilts before, and it was fun because I like to sew.
Mm-hmm.
But seeing those quilts, I felt so liberated by those quilts. I just felt the presence of the makers, and I wasn't you know, fully aware of everything that was happening to my experience of it, but I just knew I was drawn to it. And that's what actually, I don't think if I had had that experience, I would be here right now, for sure. I wouldn't just be making, you know, hole in the barn door quilts or something like that. I mean, that got me interested in it, right? I was just like, that, now I really want to do this. And I want to figure out what's going on here, because I want to create like this. And that got me into being an artist. I wasn't an artist before that, you know, and I had been in seminary and I was a divinity school dropout.
Oh.
So I just was like, I'm not going to be a minister. I just don't think, I don't think I have it, you know.
Okay.
I don't want that role. I don't want that role. I just decided I didn't want that role. But for a long time, I felt called for that. But when I went in to see that exhibit, I just, something shifted in me, and and then I took off. And the thing that is, I think the funny thing is we were talking a little earlier, you use rulers when you do your improv. When I first tried to do improv, I was working with rulers, and I just didn't get it. You know, I still didn't, it didn't have the feeling that I wanted. And then I actually took my first improv class with Nancy Crow. It was the first time she'd ever taught improv, actually. And it was at Aramont, because, you know, she had taught these black and white, all these other types of classes. So she had just started improvising. And the first thing she said to me in the class, or she said to the class, is like, you don't need a ruler to cut and sew fabric and make it lie flat.
Yeah.
You just need a ruler to make points meet and stuff. You know, it's not, and that was just like, duh, like I couldn't figure that out before. Like I just didn't, it's funny how ideas don't, you know, you need teachers sometimes to like turn those bulbs on. So then after that, I just went to town after that. I just, you know, just got so into quilting and improv, really. And then later, you know, I went back and I got me into being an artist, and I got an MFA. And so it's just evolved into my life's work.
I love that origin story.
Yeah, it's just like,
it's interesting how we will just come across some experience that causes us to see the world in a different way, just totally see the world in a different way. I know what you mean. I've had some of those experiences too.
Yeah.
So I think the question I want to ask next is about improv as a process. Tell me about that. What do you believe to be true and important and real about improv as a process?
It's a good question. I think for me, doing the improv, and I think one of the reasons those quilts were so profound in directing my path was, I don't know, it was healing. It was just healing to me in a way that, you know, I mean, I really enjoyed making fixed patterns too, because I like sewing and stuff, but there was something about the freedom of just being able to cut and sew and make my own patterns. And then I started realizing that, I mean, I'm kind of that way. Like I'm kind of a deep person in terms of what excites me. I'm always going kind of deep.
Yeah.
And so I immediately started seeing how the patterns I was making was connected to who I was and how I was making relationships in the world. And at first it was a very healing process for me. I needed a lot of healing at that time, you know? And so then then I realized, you know, I can help others find this healing. And so the healing for me is the way we can access our truth through improv, that it's not an escape. I think like when I look at like Rosie Lee Tompkins or the G. Spen quilts, that they're not just about design. They're not that they're great designers. They got
Mhm.
that going on for sure, but it goes deeper than that.
Mhm.
And I saw, I sensed that it goes into, almost in an intuitive place, the flow, where you're accessing a part of your mind that is more of your relational mind.
Mhm.
Like the more, not all about thinking out, right? It's about
Mhm.
feeling. And so feeling it in my body, feeling it. And so I recognize it as a life practice. So I was learning about myself as I
Mhm.
was making these quilts. When I saw the patterns come out, I was like, or also seeing the limits that kept me from doing certain things.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so one of the things, I can't even remember what your question was now. That's what I've just gone off. But
You're answering it.
okay, so for me, it's like so some concrete examples. I think that's really relevant to me right now. It's always been a part of it. Is I'm a very critical person. Like I have a lot of self-judgment.
Mhm.
Perfection is a big
Mhm.
part of my life,
Mhm.
and it's a really uh, I love this term unlearning that has come up through this racial awakening that people are starting to come to terms with, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Hopefully. And it just makes so much sense because that perfection is so much, it's in my body, the
Mhm.
way I cut, it's the
Mhm.
way, and so pushing past that and trying to be a little more like I like to say yes and,
Mhm.
instead of focusing on the things that I feel are just not right or something like that, I'm learning how to have more freedom of just, I don't have to worry about having everything exactly right and control
Okay.
it. I can focus on what I like. I can focus on my joy. I don't have to
Mhm.
focus on what isn't right, you know?
Mhm. Mhm.
And so that just that kind of thinking has, I've continued to growing from that, and I've been doing it for 30 years, and I'm just like still growing from
Mhm.
those kinds of things. But one of the early things I noticed is I would tell my students, okay, we're going to make sections, we're going to improvise and make sections, and you don't know how it's all going to fit together. You don't know
Right.
what you're going to end up with. And if you just make a section and you don't like it, you don't have to use it in your quilt. You can just leave it
Mhm.
out, you
Mhm.
can explore something, leave it out. So I would tell my students that, but I couldn't do it myself.
Oh.
At that point in time,
Mhm.
I was like, everything I made, I had to make it fit into the quilt. Like I couldn't
Ah.
leave it behind. I
Mhm.
couldn't leave it
Mhm.
behind.
Yes.
And I was like that for probably for the first 20 years of my improv. Like it's like I had to,
Mm.
and then in some ways, and I recognize, well, that's like I want every little part of my life to have meaning.
Okay.
Like I want to bring it all together. Like it all has to go to, has to
Okay.
all make sense. So I can't just do something and just leave it out.
Mhm.
But and
Mhm.
there's something good about that. There's also something limiting about that, because then it kept me from exploring new directions, because I'd
Mhm.
be like, if I go there and I don't like it, then I don't have to put it, so it
Mhm.
limited me too.
Mhm. Yep.
So, but now I'm not that way anymore.
Uh-huh.
I've struggled with that for so long that
Right.
now now almost all my quilts are made from things I've made at different times. Like
Oh,
the
okay.
quilt you see, the quilt, I teach so much, I only have time to sit down and make a whole quilt.
Yeah.
So all my quilts are made from demos now. Like I've made things from all different time periods and different
Mhm.
places, and then I just pull out all my piece scraps
Mhm.
and I just start putting those together, right? Or,
Okay.
so I did get to a point where I just was like, I don't need to, I mean, I don't need to put this in the quilt. I work with
Mhm.
it, it doesn't work. If I haven't sewn it together, if I've made a section of patchwork but it hasn't been sewn onto something, I can just
Got
move
it.
it and put it somewhere
Mhm.
else, and then I just save it for later.
Mhm.
And so it's interesting to see, I have progressed. I have learned things. And so improv changes.
Mhm.
It's really a process of change and transformation. I mean, it is in our quilts, right? When we make our
Mhm.
quilts. and then it changes us too.
Inside ourselves.
It's a path to growth, I think.
Yeah.
That's what I like about it.
So I teach mostly improv as well. And one of the things that I notice some of my students come in with, because they're coming, as you said, from fixed pattern quilt making. And sometimes I jokingly, not so jokingly, say, most of what you think you know about all those skills and techniques, just put them in a box and leave them at the door. And they laugh. However, sometimes when, we've shown people a couple of techniques and we say, okay, so now start, begin. And there's a fear there.
Mm-hmm.
They pause, they hesitate, they don't know where to cut. How do you help quilters get through that first, oh my gosh, I don't understand what I'm supposed to do. I can't do this kind of
Right.
feeling. How do you
Yeah.
help people?
Yeah. Well, I think it is a real thing, right? Because people, if I mean, a lot of the folks that I teach to come from the fixed pattern traditional quilting, and so they're used to following instructions.
Yes.
And I have to tell this funny story. Carol, did you take, when the G's Ben quilters came and taught at QuiltCon, were you at that QuiltCon?
I was at that QuiltCon, and I had met them some years before when they came to Baltimore, but
Okay.
so I was there at QuiltCon.
And I don't know if you took one of the classes. That's the only time I've taken a class at QuiltCon. I just wanted to take a class with them so bad.
Right.
And so I did get into one of their classes.
Uh-huh.
And I mean, it was so awesome. And there were 4 of them
Mm-hmm.
that were there, and I can't remember exactly their names. And they were amazing. But they really, their work is a lot about their faith, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what I love about it.
Yes.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
That goes to that deeper level than just design. There's design, but then there's the expression of their faith that just shines through in that work. So they, when they talk about their quilts, they talk about their faith.
Yes.
And so they shared their faith and everything, and they sang some songs for us. This is the class. There's 24 probably all white quilters in that class. I'm not sure if there was anybody of color at all in the class except for the G's Ben women. But and then and the other thing before I tell the punchline here, the other thing is the supply list was old clothes and a pair of scissors. That was it.
Yeah.
Okay, so simple, right? So after they greet us, they sing, they share their faith, they say, just start quilting. And you could hear this audible gasp, like, like, wait a minute, aren't you going to tell us what to do? And I always joke, like, I can't, if I would just go into a class that I was teaching and just say, okay, everybody, welcome to class, just start quilting.
Yeah.
I wouldn't get paid, right?
Right. There would be a revolt.
So I was just like flabbergasted, but I loved it because what I saw them saying, which I don't know if everyone in the class got this, but what I got out of it was they were just giving us their blessing. There was like, it's okay, whatever you make is good.
Yeah.
Just start quilting.
Yeah.
I mean, that kind of permission is so radical that people even miss it.
Yeah.
Instead, they just gasp, like, somebody tell us what to do, right?
Yeah.
They're giving them permission, like, whatever you make is good, just start.
Yeah.
Right? So I try to give that permission to my students. I try to pass that blessing on.
Yeah.
And I make sure to let people know that everyone has the right to start where they are and continue to grow. And it's just not about comparison or anything. And then I also just try to try to encourage them to follow their internal cues, look at what's
Yes.
exciting to them, and
Hmm.
try to give them the authority. Try to have them find where they can find their authority, which is
Yeah.
by looking inside, right? Not
Hmm.
looking to me. And we got all kinds. I mean, they can look to me, but my role as a teacher is more of to facilitate them trying to figure out what they want to do, rather
Hmm.
than say this is what you're
Right.
going to do, because
Make this
otherwise
like
it's not
mine.
right. Otherwise it's not improv, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes it's hard to do that, because it's, as a teacher, with a lot of experience, I could easily see, well, this would make it really interesting if you go
Hmm.
do this and this and this. But
Hmm.
and sometimes I'll throw those suggestions out, but
Right.
mostly I want to try to get them to start to think,
Hmm.
okay, well, put some different colors up there and see what excites you,
Yes.
right?
Hmm.
Okay, that one excites you, then go for that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And just affirm their decision, and then let them develop with that.
And
Yeah.
this approach that you're describing is so completely different from all, I shouldn't say all, most of the messages quilters get from the day they pick up the first quilt magazine, quilt pattern. This is the right way. This is the correct way. If you make it like this, it'll look like that when you're done, and therefore you will have been successful.
Right.
Uh, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, except that it's been promoted as the only way that quilting could be done.
Right.
And until people, the quilt world, really began to pay attention to the improvisational quilts being made, of course, by African American quilters
Yes.
for years and years and years. But it was really, not but, and it was really an approach by poor women who
Mm-hmm.
didn't have anything except old clothes or feed sacks or whatever to
Yeah.
work with. They had limited resources, and they needed to make these utilitarian coverings for their children and their families and themselves. So uh, when our world began to value that as another way of seeing and making, and realizing it wasn't just some sort of instinct, that these women were also being thoughtful about how they were putting these quilts
Oh,
together,
yeah.
and color and shape, and then playing with it
Mm-hmm.
out of necessity and out of design. So all of that is fortunately now being valued, and who knows what the next discovery will be in our
I
world.
know.
I
And
can't
the
wait.
and I think it is. It's been, I mean, actually the exhibit of the G's Ben quilts
Right.
is transformed a lot of
Hmm.
I mean, the modern quilt movement might not
Right.
have evolved. It's certainly I mean, it's a big part of the modern quilt
Yes.
movement even evolving out of it,
Yes.
because it started to evolve right around that time when
Hmm.
people were seeing
Hmm.
those quilts. It got
Hmm.
young women interested in
Hmm.
quilting again,
Yeah.
right? And it also has had a huge, I was in art school at the time getting my
Hmm.
MFA at Bard College in New York, and it had a huge impact on artists.
Yeah.
And
It
you're
did.
seeing a lot more quilting in the art world.
Yes.
And that's a whole nother conversation. But so
Yes.
it's had a big impact
Hmm.
on a cultural impact,
Right.
with
It
a
has.
lot, quilters, artists, and I'm sure other designers, lots of different creative communities.
Hmm.
And I think the other thing that's just really phenomenal about uh, that kind of approach to quilting, and when you think about the G-Span, it's also about relationships.
Hmm.
It's like the community, and it was really emphasized with the G-Span being in a community
Right.
of sharing, right? of
Mhm.
growing together through
Mhm.
generations,
Mhm.
like a culture that was created. And those
Yeah.
relationships, I think, I feel like the quilts are so relational. Like, I don't know how
Mhm.
to say that, like how to explain
Mhm.
what I'm thinking about with
Mhm.
that. But when I see those quilts, I feel like I'm seeing relationships that are beyond just a clever design, or,
Right.
that they feel warm, they feel inviting,
Mhm.
they feel like the way a nice quilt feels wrapped around you,
Yeah.
and exciting and
Mhm.
surprising um, and accessible and vulnerable.
Mhm. Mhm.
So I think that one of the things that I think is really important about improv, facilitating improv, is creating community, and a community of learning where people learn from each other, not just from me, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
That's so important. And I see that as part of that legacy too from
Yes.
the quilters. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm completely in agreement with you on that. And it's also about the atmosphere in the room. And the thought that just came into my mind when you said that is, in some classes, types of quilt classes, where getting it right is the emphasis or the objective, there's a level of competitiveness in the class,
Ah,
inevitably, around how skilled you are. Did your
uh-huh.
points match, or did you cut it,
Yeah.
blah, blah, blah,
Yeah, yeah.
which is very intimidating to newer quilters of any age, but newer quilters. Uh, and I think in an improv class, we have the ability to really shift that energy to how can I help you learn? And how can you help me learn, as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to perform,
Right.
as opposed to perform.
I agree with that.
Yeah. I want to shift to a different topic.
Okay.
I want to talk about reduce, reuse, recycle, the old clothes thing. And I know you've done a project around that. Talk about
Yeah.
it.
Okay. Yeah, actually, I've been dying to write another book called Old Clothes and a Pair of Scissors, inspired by the G's Ben list.
Mhm.
I think the idea of making do, right?
Yes.
And I mean, it's a complex idea, actually. So, oh my gosh, we could do a whole show on it. So I'm trying to think of how to make it simple. But I think, yeah, so I did a residency at the San Francisco
Yes.
Dump, an artist residency,
Mhm.
and my project for that was to look at the idea of, back in the day, I know not all quilts were made this way, but
Mhm.
back in a certain strain of quilting came from scrap quilting and quilting
Yes.
with whatever you had, whether it was like
Mhm.
samples from, um, the peddler that came by that
Mhm.
left you a little wool sample, or feed sacks, or
Mhm.
old clothes that ran out, that
Mhm.
you couldn't use as clothing anymore, or um, so that's always been interesting to me. And also thinking about it, so I did a whole exhibit, at the dump. The goal of the residency at the dump is whatever the artist was doing there, 99% of all the materials they used to create the art that they would make had to come from the dump. Now, this is not like the thrift store. This is like people throwing their trash off their truck,
Mhm.
front loaders pushing it and smashing it. You're like
Mhm.
in a helmet, like a hard hat and
Mhm.
goggles and gloves and a safety vest and steel-toed boots and shoes, and going through the trash and trying to salvage things out before it gets shoved up and
Mhm.
recycled, and oh, smelly,
Yeah.
all this stuff. But it was unbelievable how much stuff people threw out, right?
Mhm.
I found several perfectly working sewing machines, even a working serger, brand
Wow.
new iron. I found everything I needed. So in a way, there
Mhm.
wasn't really a lot of making do, because
Because we're a
It was,
wasteful society.
yeah, it's so abundant, right? I think now, though, with COVID, people are, people that are used to having a lot, you know, just their whole existence has been privileged, are feeling are feeling the sense of having limitations in life. So used to, when I would talk about, you know, one of the things about finding flow is how you form limits. Like if you have too many choices, which is typically what a lot of people have, too many choices in our culture. And so they're overwhelmed, right? But if you don't have enough choices, you can feel very, I think what happens is people's energy drops, you get bored, you lose interest. And then there's the point where you can break out of that and start to make do. Think outside the box is another way of thinking it. You know, making do is just another way of saying thinking outside of the box. It's just that you think you have to think outside the box because you don't have any other choice.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Like when my mother would look in the refrigerator and say, okay, let's see what's for dinner. It wasn't about running to the nearest, you know, Whole Foods store. Even if there had been one, she wouldn't have done that. But it was, you know, this, that, there's some leftovers, there's this, that, and here's a wonderful meal.
Right.
And we never questioned it. We just thought it was magic.
Yeah, it was. But she's thinking outside the box all the time, right? And so I think improv has that element to it, right?
So tell me first of all, what called you to go after that residency? How did that residency happen? I guess I should ask.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was interested in the idea of making do, and I mean, I knew of the residency, and to be able to apply, you have to go on a tour. So that's one of the requirements. So I went on the tour of the dump and found out about the residency program, and I just, you know, I just really felt passionate about this idea of the making do. And I mean, probably that workshop with I mean, that phrase, old clothes and a pair of scissors, had been in my mind for a long time. And so I came up with this idea of, you know, why I want to have a 4-month experience where I'm just focusing on this process of it. I think the making do process is also a receptive creative process, in the sense that you have to kind of accept what is, what comes, and make with what you've got, right? As opposed to my early experiences with quilting. Like I remember one of the very first quilts I made, like a log cabin, and I was doing it for somebody, and they were like, we want orange and green, and maybe it could fade into one or the other. And I sort of designed it. I you know, used colored pencils and drew it all out. And then I bought all the fabrics to create that gradation. And then I cut it all, you know, I measured, figured out what size it had to be, figured it all out. And then I made it. And I felt great. I was like, this didn't exist before. And it's just now here it is. I made it, you know, out of my imagination. So there's something about that kind of creativity. It's a very active, but it's also very consumer based. It's very consumption. But for a long time, that's where I was focused. Like whatever I want to create, I have the power to go out, get the materials I want, and make what I see. Right. So that's one way of creating. And then now and I think the making do, that residency really helped me see that more clearly. It was like more about receiving instead of going out and buying or taking. It was more about receiving. So here's the stuff that's been thrown out. I mean, it's all a matter of this moment that I'm in the dump looking at stuff. All of a sudden, some beautiful thing comes my way. If I had been there a minute later or a minute earlier, I wouldn't have seen it, right? And so so you're there and you're kind of open. You're just open to the possibilities, and it comes to you. And then you have a responsibility to collaborate with that material. I mean, that was part of my parameters for the workshop. I mean, for the residency was like, then when I get that material, what do I, so I had these military uniforms that came to me, right?
Ah,
Somebody
okay.
dumped out 2 bags of military, and they were clean. They were
Mhm.
clean military uniforms, you know, and they were in these laundry bags. And it
Mhm.
was a woman. It was a woman who was in the Navy because they were small. I could tell
Mhm.
they were, and they also,
Mhm.
her name was in there, so I knew it was a
Mhm.
woman. And I had all, you know, like these 6 pairs of military pants
Mhm.
in blues or blacks, beige, and white.
Okay.
And so I made this quilt, 6 pairs of pants, but I used the whole pair of pants. I mean, I could have cut those pants up in any shape I wanted,
Sure.
but I wanted to keep the shape that they came in as they were given. So I made those my limits, right, to
Mhm.
make do
Mhm.
with the limits of the materials that would come. So it's a more receptive of listening to the
Yeah.
materials
Yeah.
and seeing what their nature was,
Mhm.
and then evolving a vision with the materials themselves of what I was going to
Right.
make. And so that's a different kind of creativity. And I
Mhm.
think for improv, that receptive idea of collaborating with your patchwork as the patterns unfold, because you're not planning it all ahead, right? So you have to
Exactly.
keep listening and
Mhm.
responding, and that's,
Mhm.
I think, the making do experience too.
Yeah.
And that's maybe what I was talking about earlier, where there's a sense of relationship
Mhm.
in
Mhm.
this kind of quilt making that is very immediate because it's
Mhm.
happening in the moment
Mhm.
instead of being planned ahead of time,
Right.
those relationships. So I don't know, it was exciting, and there were all kinds of serendipitous, but it was also about, it was funny because I called the exhibit Afterlife,
Mhm.
and because in some ways it was giving, I think it was a hopeful, I think, anyways, I could go on about this, but I think the idea though was also life after system collapse, because
Huh.
seeing that kind of waste go through just one city dump
Mhm.
day after day,
Mhm.
24/7, is profound. And
And
you
we are,
realize it's not sustainable.
well, and we're also now, when we can clear our minds enough to pay attention, we being Americans, US based folks, we're also learning that there is a mythology around recycling, that what we believe is happening to the stuff we are passing on to recycling, whether it's going to Salvation Army or Goodwill or whoever, is not actually what's happening to all those goods that we think we have no further need of. That
Right.
there's a real mythology there, along with the plastic recycling and everything else. It ain't what we think. There is
No. So,
actually still a tremendous amount of waste. And places that we've been dumping our stuff, Asia and Africa in particular, countries there are saying, you know what? We got first of all, we got our own stuff to get rid of, and we don't want to be your trash heap anymore. There are
right.
some environmental concerns that are causing those countries to stand up, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, and say no. And they're getting pushback on it.
Yeah.
A lot of pushback that they're being told they're not allowed to say no in some cases. And
Mm,
they're doing it anyway, which takes a lot of
yeah.
courage.
Yeah.
So
So
I'm
we're going to have
hoping
to,
that we once we aren't as worried about dying from the pandemic, maybe we can begin to focus again on our consumptive society,
right.
consumerism,
Right.
our consumerism need. Um, and of course, it's all over the quilt industry. You
Oh,
know, we,
yeah.
we want to support, small quilt shops and so forth. And as I'm sure you do, in for my workshops, my list of fabrics, I keep saying over and over, shop your stash, look in your
Oh,
closet,
yeah.
shop your stash. And I have friends who own quilt shops, and I just can't continue to support, oh, and go buy 3 yards of that and a yard of this and a yard of
Yeah.
that to make this quilt. I can't do it anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
So,
that's the beauty of improv. You don't have to,
no.
because you don't have to have a certain fixed amount of something. It's just like
Right.
if you run out of something, you just substitute
Find
something
something
else
else.
and use your stash. Why not use your stash, or use your
Right.
clothes, or whatever you need,
Yeah.
And yeah, and I mean, we're definitely going to have to come up with more sustainable systems.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good thing about the pandemic. I think it's going to make us, and I think, I don't know. I don't know what's really happening with consumption, but yeah, well, we'll see. But I think the thing, one of the reasons I think I was lucky enough to get that residency, because there are, a lot. I mean, it's a very sought after residency in the Bay Area.
Hmm.
It's a really an amazing opportunity. So it's very competitive,
Right.
and I think one of the reasons I was chosen was because at that moment in time, that was 2016,
Hmm.
there was just a big heightened awareness about how much material waste was going into the dump, meaning
Ah.
clothing,
Hmm.
fabric. I found whole big stashes from quilt makers
Yeah.
thrown away at the dump.
Yeah.
I found sewing boxes and sewing kits and tools and supplies. I found pre-cuts,
Yeah.
like a huge box of all these pre-cut bright colors. It looked like it might have been from the 90s or 80s.
Hmm.
I think it's some poly blend, but still squares,
Hmm.
rectangles, triangle. I mean, just so, but not even that. I mean, the most material waste is just from our clothing and stuff.
Yes.
So, I mean, we
Yes.
can just make so much just from clothing. And
Hmm.
we don't, I agree. I think we need to move away from, um, I don't know, there's got to be some other ways
Yeah.
to use fabric as quilt makers than the quilting fabric. And it's also more exciting sometimes to use other types of
Yeah.
materials,
Hmm.
because it makes you think creatively in different ways.
Yeah. It does. And for me, it takes me back to my early quilting days when I was an art quilter and using all kinds of fabrics and textures, mainly because I didn't have to worry about it being washed. It was made to hang on the wall like any other piece of
Yeah.
fine art. But um, yeah, so you and I and other quilt teachers as well are encouraging people to look in your home first.
Yeah.
Look there first and use. You've spent a lot of money on that fabric, and
Right.
you know, and my guild, we've been the recipient of a couple of stashes, huge stashes from quilters who passed away. Their
Uh-huh.
families at least had the forethought to reach out and say, maybe there's a group of quilters who might like this fabric before they put it on the curb in black plastic bags, which
Right.
more often than not. And we quilters know it and we make jokes about it, but there's nothing funny about it at all, in my
Mm-hmm.
view. But
Yeah.
anyway, enough of my rant. And I want to ask you one more question, change topic again. I know you teach a lot. You've been teaching a lot for years. Um, how, how do I want to ask the question? When we teach, we're always getting ready to teach and we're making samples and we're doing all this stuff. How do you carve out time for just you making, just for you?
Okay, I'm going to be totally honest with you, Carol, on this one.
Okay.
When I was traveling and teaching, I
Mm-hmm.
actually had no time.
Ah.
I was just too exhausted from
Mm-hmm.
teaching.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been, I would say for the last 3 years at least, 3 or 4 years, I've really not made a lot of new things. And I've just been, and I haven't even wanted to,
Yeah.
because I've
Mm-hmm.
just been teaching and traveling. Now, actually, it's been a blessing in some ways to be able to do this online teaching during this time, because it's allowed me to, I mean, I love teaching.
Mm-hmm.
I love the teaching, but the traveling and the
Yeah.
teaching and being disrupted from my home that
Mm-hmm.
much was
Mm-hmm.
just too much, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And now I can stay at home and teach, and I can enjoy my students. I feel like I'm much more alive with my students now, because I'm finally coming out of that burnout,
Ah.
and I am making enough money to support myself. And that's another reason that I was burning out, was that I was just like treading water financially too. And so this is finally, I'm getting paid what I think I'm really worth, and I'm not getting burned out, and I am starting to be more creative, and I'm finally starting to make more work. And but I have to say, the most stuff that I did during all these times of traveling and teaching were just my class samples.
Yes.
Because when I would go into a class, I don't even bring fabric with me. I
Mm-hmm.
tell my class, well, this was when I was traveling, right? When before the pandemic.
Right.
I was just like, bring some fabric to share with the class. So that was always a part of my supply list, because I want people to get out of matching fabrics all the time. And people don't know how to do that unless they have some other fabrics that aren't the kinds of fabrics that they normally use.
True.
Right?
True.
So I invite everyone, just bring some fabric. It can be anything. It can be your ugly fabric you don't like. Just bring something to share to the class. And there'd always be all this fabric that would come in. So whatever I would make, whatever my demos would be made out of, would be out of the fabric that people brought.
Right.
And sometimes I would bring some solids, because people wouldn't bring much solid, and it'd be all these crazy prints, and that was a little bit hard. So sometimes I'd have to bring solids.
Right.
But anyway, so I have lots of patchwork, like bags and bags of patchwork from all the different demos. And I can show you this. This is this is one of the only quilts I made during that period of time. And I was at Sew OK in Oklahoma City. I'm trying to think of the woman's name who ran that, but it was nice, and I had time, and I made some patchwork. Well, actually, some of the different places I made patchwork, I can't even remember now everywhere. Oh, I finished it at So Okay. I made some parts, but this is just made at lots of different, these are like demos from lots of different classes, all put into one piece, right?
Right. Oh, it's fabulous. I love it. I love it.
And I don't know, you know, all the fabrics came from other people, and so that's kind of, so now I do have all of those demos that I can still, and I'm still making demos in the live stream workshops.
Right.
So so that's kind of what I'm playing around with these days, and we'll see if I can. I'm still coming out of it, but it's starting to come back.
Well, it occurs to me too that writing your book, because your book came out in 2015, and that's probably a 2-year at least process to get to that.
That's exactly 2 years. Yeah.
And then I'm sure your teaching, you know, blew up because of the book, because it's a fabulous book.
Thank you.
And I will have links, you know, to it, because I want you to go out and get it if you don't own it already.
I have some good news about the book. I haven't shared it. I keep thinking I'm going to share it on social media, and I haven't yet. But I did get an email from the editor, and I think it went into its 8th printing.
Wow.
And with the 8th printing, it has over 25,000 copies in circulation. So that's very exciting that they made that commitment to do another big printing.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Especially these days, for printers to make that commitment to support you like that is fabulous.
Yeah.
Congrats.
Thank you.
Well, it's an important book. And a lot of times I hear people characterize it as a modern quilting book. And it's not just that. It's an important book for quilters, period. Because there are lessons to be learned from it, regardless of what style of quilting you decide to then make. They're just sitting with it and reading and maybe playing with some scraps or whatever with the ideas that you know, so eloquently describe in the book. It's just it's it's a learning process, and whatever we learn, it's going to inform, whatever we're doing. So,
Oh,
so that's my plug for your book.
I'm glad
And
to
I'm
hear
not
that.
getting
Thank you.
paid, people. I'm not getting paid.
Thank you. Thank you. I really like hearing that. Thank you,
You're
Carol.
so welcome, and it's meant very sincerely.
Yeah.
Well, I want to end with some fast questions, and you can answer them fast or slow. And I'll let you have the last word, the last final word, however you want to close our conversation. But okay, first question, your favorite color to work with?
So I'm gonna say there's no favorite color. I just don't. I think that. I don't have a favorite color.
Okay.
So it's all the colors are good. All the
Mhm.
colors are good, and they just so I like to work with color intuitively
Okay.
and allow myself the opportunity to pick whatever colors are, presenting. I use
Mhm.
memories a lot of times to bring up colors. I will say this though, I am a child of the 70s.
Uh-huh.
And I think that comes across in a lot of my quilts and the way they kind of look color
Mhm.
wise too. And that you see right behind me, those colors right there, the strings. I
Yes.
am using my childhood memories of one of my homes when I was in like from first to sixth grade, the house that I lived
Ah,
in then,
uh-huh.
which was in the
Okay.
70s. So those are color memories of either rooms or my parents or, so
Oh,
that's
Sherri Lynn, I think that's another book. Just put a pin in that.
yeah,
Or at least a wonderful workshop.
yeah.
I'd
I'm
take that one.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we just did that one actually. We just did that in freestyle strings. That's one of the big parts of that workshop was accessing
Ah,
color memory. And one of the interesting things that came out in that workshop, I've only taught it twice like this with
mhm.
really going into the memories. And this time I was surprised by how many people, first of all, said that they were surprised they even had a color memory because they didn't think they
Okay.
would have one.
Mhm.
And then that they had a color memory that wasn't necessarily positive.
Ah,
And
mhm.
then they said, but I made, I used those colors anyways. And then they said something like, and I never use these colors in my work.
Yeah.
Anyways, I don't know where that's going. That's brand new for me. So I find that really,
Well, you'll have to come back in a few months and tell us where
yeah.
it's going. My last question. Uh, what piece of advice would you give to new quilters and sewers?
Okay, new improv quilters.
Yes, let's make it
Okay.
new improv quilters.
Because I don't know what advice I'd give to any just quilters in general. Maybe it
Okay.
could be general. I'd say people with improv, um, I would say uh, there's so much advice I would give. I would say just it's for you. It's for you. It's not for you to please and you don't have to please anybody with this. You don't have to make it as a gift to anybody for anyone.
Right.
It's just for you. It's a gift for yourself. It's it's about you learning about yourself. Enjoy, celebrate your own patterns and you don't have to compare yourself. It's not
Mhm.
about that. It's about having a place to start. Everybody has the right to start where they are and just continue to grow on the path that they choose to
Yeah.
explore. It's just about you. Enjoy it. Celebrate the mistakes. There's no such thing as mistakes. I mean, just enjoy
Mhm.
it
Yeah.
and learn for yourself and don't worry about anybody else around that process.
Oh, I think that those are wonderful words to end on.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being with me today. Oh,
Thank you,
keep
Carol.
talking.
Those were such great questions. I think maybe later on, I know you're going
Yes,
to interview some other people. We'll have to
yes.
do this again, but I interview you
Oh,
for your
okay.
channel. I
All
think that'd
right.
be fun.
All right. That's a date.
I had such a great time. Thank you so
Oh,
much.
thank you. And thank you everybody for tuning in to these conversations. I hope that you've enjoyed it, and I'll be sure to drop in links. And as I edit, I'll probably add a few photos as well. Who knows what I'll put in the final edits. But thank you, Sherri Lynn. Thank you. You've been so generous
Thank
with
you.
your time and your
Oh,
wisdom.
so
I
have
loved
you.
it. Love you.
Love you too.
And bye-bye, everybody. Be
Bye,
well.
everyone.
Bye-bye.